Hi, I'm Sarah, and I am 11 years sober.
Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for coming here to do this interview, to tell your story to those who might need to hear it. And I know that you've had quite a journey. You are 11 years sober.
Yes, just recently.
But your sober anniversary date wasn't as special as you had hoped.
Well, no.
You've gone through a lot of traumatic experiences recently. Do you mind telling me what's been going on with you?
Yes. Well, actually, it made my sober birthday that much more special, I think. So at the beginning of the year, I guess the end of last year, I spent some time with both my mom and my dad. And on January 4th, which was my 11 years sober, my mother passed away in her sleep at 66 of a massive heart attack. And then the same time we found out that our mother had passed, our father was rushed to the emergency room via ambulance, and he was air flighted a day and a half later. And he ended up passing 3 weeks to the day of my mom. So on January 25th, at actually 3 days after his 65th birthday. So it's been a whole thing.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that. How did that affect your sobriety? Did it have any impact on your sobriety?
If anything, it made it that much more powerful. The very last thing that my mom said to me on that evening was how proud of me she was for having 11 years and for changing the course of our family. So, yeah,
you have quite a turmoiled history in your family.
Yes.
That revolves around addiction. We'll get to that in a little bit, but right now I'd like to get a little background on you, your childhood, and who you were, who Sarah was before addiction.
Childhood was rough. My mom was the best mom. All things considered, my mother actually experienced a tremendous amount of abuse at the hands of her father, both sexual and physical. There was a lot of abuse, and it came from generation after generation of veterans coming home from war and experiencing things. And, shameless plug, there's a lot of issues within the armed forces, and unfortunately, my mom was hugely impacted by that. She fought a lot of demons, but she absolutely did her best, and she ended up, when she died, she had over 5 years sober, which was pretty incredible. My mom was married and divorced 3 times by the time she was 35. And I have an older sister who is 13 years older than me, and from a different relationship. And really, my parents divorced when I was 4. They went through a lot. My mom was heavily in addiction at that time, and she broke away and decided to get clean, and she moved us up north. And we got to live in a beautiful winter and summer wonderland. And we were pretty oblivious to how different things were for us in our upbringing. Yeah.
Did you see, looking back, did you see a lot of the addiction?
Oh my gosh. Now it's one of those things where, you know what I mean? Everything was trying to be kept quiet, swept under the rug. But now that I'm an adult, I understand the impact that all of that had on us as we grew up. My brother and I, especially, were less than 2 years apart. And we experienced a lot of things that our peers did not experience. Yeah. And it was really difficult. My mom was a single mom of two. My dad he did the best he could as well with his upbringing. And, food was scarce. I remember many times my brother and I splitting a can of tuna and my mom going hungry. And my mother had the most incredible green thumb that has ever existed. And luckily, I was able to explore that a little bit in the last couple of years before she passed. And she's been my greatest mentor and my greatest champion, my greatest supporter. I mean, that's what moms are, right? And I'm really, really thankful that we were able to get to a place in the last few years where I got to learn from her every day. And
So the drug use that was prevalent in your family, was that was in the background? You didn't see it like firsthand as a child?
I mean, my mom is a musician. Okay. And so, I mean, she's a musician in the 70s and 80s where it was all drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And there were times where we were exposed to it, but weren't aware of it. I remember waking up in the middle of the night one time when I was sick, and there were just a bunch of musicians out and about. And I'm sure there were drugs and alcohol. And I remember, I remember nights where my mom didn't, she went out and she partied, and there were a lot of nights like that.
But it wasn't like she did drugs in front of you.
No, there was a time when I was really young where that happened. But she had really tried to change her ways. Unfortunately, she hadn't gotten into personal therapy until a little while later. But my brother was busted for pot for the first time when he was 15. So I was 13. And as I got older in my teenage years, things kind of got a little crazy. My brother was an addict, and he graduated with our dad. He moved down there when he was a senior. And it was always just that unspoken kind of thing. I mean, my aunt is sober now. One of my uncles passed away with cocaine in his system in his 70s. My brother was an intravenous drug user. And my brother was my best friend, and I was his biggest enabler. And I'm happy to say my brother is clean and sober now. He is building a beautiful life for him and his kiddos, and he is still one of my best friends. It wasn't like that for a long time, especially in the beginning of my sobriety. I had to definitely distance myself. But my brother was in that world, and I wanted to be with my brother. So I graduated from high school with honors, and I was a really great kid. But in the shadows, I was, I learned how to make a crack pipe out of a tire gauge when I was 17. And, the first time I ever helped someone shoot up was when I was 17. And at that point, I hadn't really gone too deep into my addiction. I was still a very straight-laced little kiddo. I graduated with honors, like I said, and had almost a full ride scholarship to a private Christian university after I graduated. And nobody knew what I had gone through. You know, my mom put us in the church, and that was a great foundation for us. But the man I lost my virginity to was one of the youth sponsors, one of the adult youth sponsors. And, you know, we had this life where everything was fine, but food wasn't on the table. I was being, you know, sexually abused by a youth pastor. My brother was shooting up. I remember I snuck out of a lock-in with that youth sponsor. And when I was 16, I actually got pregnant. And my higher power has always had a plan, and I miscarried at 8 weeks. But during that time, I mean, my mom was with her boyfriend downstate, and there were a lot of things that I did by myself growing up. My brother and I talk about how we were fully self-sufficient, getting ourselves up and, you know, at 6 and 8. And that was our deal. We were very much each other's best friend because that was what we had. And my mom did absolutely the best she could at the time. But there was just a lot of dysfunction everywhere. And it was always supposed to be quiet. But I mean, secrets keep you sick.
Sure. Do you feel, how would you say your family's drug use affected you and perhaps your addiction in the future?
So I wouldn't say it was necessarily just the drug use, but it was the behavior around it, right? If you don't do some work on yourself, nothing changes other than the fact that you aren't using your drug of choice, right? You're still going to be, I mean, not everybody who has been an addict is a piece of shit, but you're still going to make decisions that aren't healthy for you or those around you.
So your mother has quite a story behind her as well.
My mother is one of the most incredible, amazing, intelligent, creative, beautiful human beings I've ever met. Her story and the way that she lived her life out until the day she died is an inspiration to me. It should be an inspiration to everybody. Someday I'll write a book, maybe. But the things that woman, I mean, she didn't necessarily run away, but when she turned 18, she got as far away as she could, and she spent some time riding a motorcycle and hitchhiking through the US. And at one point, she was picked up by a man, and he was going to give her a ride. And as they were going, he started turning and making different turns and going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into this forest. And as he was driving, my mom knew what was going to happen. My mom knew, because I mean, she's a very street smart woman. And this man took my mother into the middle of the woods and raped her. And my mom told the story that she was completely stoic. And when they were done, she made him take her to town and buy her lunch. And there was another time, my mom was a musician, and there was another time where one of her regular fans, she's out smoking behind the bar, and they pulled her into their car and just horribly assaulted her. And that's on top of, I mean, horrible abuse. She was held at gunpoint by her father and had her skull beaten against a brick wall. And that doesn't even touch the sexual abuse that she experienced. And that wasn't just the only sexual abuse in our family. There's unfortunately, too many stories to tell about incestuous relationships within our family. There's 3 alone just in my mother's generation within her brothers and sisters and her dad. There was just a lot of dysfunction everywhere, and everybody tried to cope with it as best they could, and it was kind of a mess for a really, really long time.
Well, the trauma and the addiction, often go hand in hand.
Absolutely, 1,000%. And the more research that they do on trauma, they're working on studies right now to see how much trauma can be genetically imprinted. And they're proving that trauma that is experienced by your ancestors can be imprinted in their genes. And then those responses can be passed down to you. And on top of that, I mean, there's a 40% chance that you're going to have the addiction gene. And a lot of the time, the trauma that you experience and, nurture versus nature, all of those things really affect how that gene is going to present itself, or if it is going to present itself.
When would you say when did you have your first drink?
So I remember the night perfectly. I remember what I was wearing. I was wearing like this bright orange Old Navy sweatshirt, and I snuck out of the house with my best friend from across the street. And she was going to a high school party, and I was a sophomore and she was a senior. And I remember I snuck out the front window and my mom still had the Christmas lights up, and I went to run and it like clotheslined me on my ankles, and I just fell right on my face. And that should have been my sign to be like, no, we're good. But we ended up sneaking out, and her friends picked us up, and we went to this party, and I was just this awkward, chubby, weird sophomore girl hanging out with all these cool kids that were my brother's friends. But my brother was downstate with our dad, in all of his trouble. And I remember I just drank so much that within probably 30 minutes of the party, I was in the bathroom with my head in the sink, vomiting my guts out. And they were also cool because I was sister. And so they took good care of me. But it was a pretty miserable experience from start to finish. And I didn't drink for a while.
How old were you?
I was 16.
And that was when you had your very first drink?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what inspired you
15 maybe.
To keep drinking? Was it the scene and the people?
So I didn't really keep drinking. I graduated high school. I was a good kid. It wasn't until I went off to my private Christian university where I was all of a sudden with all of these kids who had never even had their first kiss. They, were virgins. They were dating people for years and hadn't had their first kiss. And I was all of a sudden in this place surrounded by all of these people. And that was really when I realized that I was different. I had already had sex with 3 people by the time I went off to college, and, no one else at school had to call the cops at 3:00 on a school night because, their brother brought a knife fight back to the house, and no one else had to call the cops on, their mom after they got out of the hospital with brain shock treatments because she didn't recognize them, and nobody else had gotten pregnant by their youth pastor, and I felt very isolated. I was, my mom did her best, but she really did protect me probably too much. There was so much dysfunction in the balance of all of that, of this is where we came from. And unfortunately, I wish that I would have had a heads up as to what I was up against as far as addiction goes. So essentially, I ended up getting kicked out of that school a little bit over a semester in, because my roommate told on me for smoking cigarettes, and my mom had sent me a care package, and there were scratch-off lotto tickets in there, and that is considered gambling, and that is against the rules. And then a rumor went around that I had, because everybody knew that I had a sordid past, a rumor went around that I had given a bunch of soccer players blowjobs at a party at the school, and that I had drank, and I took my contract pretty seriously. We snuck off campus to smoke cigarettes, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal. And so essentially, because I had already been in trouble, the girls told them that it was me, and they were pretty much just like, we don't know what you want to do. But, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to move out. I quit. So it was a Thursday. I had moved all my stuff out by Sunday, and that was when I had my first homeless experience. For the next, I want to say 5 months, I was fairly homeless. I stayed in my car a couple of times. I lived in a motel for a while. Just stayed on different friends' couches, air mattresses, all over Grand Rapids. I had a couple of people from church that let me live with them, which was amazing. But that was really when I, started drinking, and I met a boy from work who ended up fathering my child a few years later. And, I worked in the restaurant industry since I was 16, and it takes a special kind to do that. And everything was readily available to me. It didn't matter that I was a minor. Booze was everywhere. Weed was everywhere. Whatever I wanted was wherever I wanted it to be. And that was really the turning point. That was when I was just like, well, everybody thinks I'm a slut, and I'm a drunk. And that was when everything really caught up with me. I didn't have very good coping mechanisms. I didn't have much to go on. And all of a sudden I was just this 18-year-old girl with, I didn't want to go home. Things at home weren't great still. And yeah.
If people were calling you a drunk at this point, so would you say the problem started earlier?
There was no doubt that I wouldn't have been an addict of some sort. I guess I didn't see it at first. You never do. That's part of it, right? But really, as soon as I started drinking, it was never enough. As soon as I dropped out of college and started partying, it was party until I pass out, party until I wake up in a room that I don't recognize, party until I decide that I want to go to the next party and I get in my car and I drive, party until I wake up naked with all of my clothes folded so sweetly on the bed because I got shit-faced drinking gin, playing beer pong, and tried to come onto my best friend's roommate. Luckily, he was a very sweet gentleman and made me go to bed. But it happened real quick. As soon as I tasted that freedom and I realized that it could help me hide some of the dysfunction and the things that I had experienced and the things that I had done, it went real quick.
How long did it take for you to notice you had a problem?
Probably not until I was arrested 7 times.
7 times.
Yeah. So I got my first OWI when I was 19. While I was on probation for that, I got pregnant. And the night that I got pregnant, oh my God, I threw up. It was a dry wedding, of course. And I threw up on the door of the bathroom because, of course, I was, the date to one of the groomsmen. So me and another girl, and I'm just a baby. I'm 19, and I've never, even in my deepest depths, I have never been able to hold my liquor very well. Yeah, and I remember it was a really good time. And then I went back and had to take a drug test, and I pissed hot. And then I forgot about this. And then I went to jail for 4 days. I got let out on a Tuesday, on a Friday, I think. And then I had a meeting with my probation officer, who I proceeded to call a very bad word on social media. And I walked into her office. I had done 32 of my 40 hours of community service. I was short 8 hours, but I had put it off and put it off and put it off. Well, apparently my probation officer's tipping point was me calling her that word. And I walked into her office, and she held up a printed off version of what I posted about her, which is a very bad word. And yeah, she violated me right there. I got arrested again. I was out of jail for 4 days, went back in. I sat 5 days, 1 day for every 8 hours. And at that point, they didn't know how to classify me. So 0 to 5, they classified me as a 3. And so that was considered felon. So this scared little 19-year-old girl, got moved into the felon cell at 4 a.m. for not doing all of her community service and telling her probation officer that she was a C word. And yeah. I was there with women who were about to go to prison for attempted murder, for killing someone while drunk driving, check fraud, retail fraud. And that should have been when I got scared straight, but it was not, because alas, I was only 19. I was pregnant at the time. Didn't know it quite yet. My probation officer let me off of probation early because I got pregnant and I was doing great and everything was wonderful and fantastic. And I did great throughout my pregnancy. I did not drink. Well, I did before I found out. I actually drank a half pint, and that was one of the things that cued me into the fact that I was pregnant, is because I drank a half pint and I got so drunk that I got locked in my closet, and my mom had to come fish me out, and I could not get out. I was in there for probably 45 minutes, and my mom was like, what are you doing? And yeah. And the next day I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And I decided to take a test, and I remember calling my mom and being terrified. And I was like, Mom, I have something to tell you. It's really, really bad, and I'm really, really sorry. And her first response was, is it drugs? Are you addicted to cocaine? What is it? I was like, no, Mom, I'm pregnant. She was like, oh, that's so great. That's so much better than you being a drug addict. And that should have been a sign too, right there, right? So yeah, I had this baby boy. In 2009. And my mother was amazing throughout the entire pregnancy. She cooked all of my meals based on what he was developing at the time. And you got to remember, I was a 19, 20-year-old girl. I had no idea what I was doing. The only reason why I kept this baby, I mean, I had made 2 appointments to get an abortion, and I backed out both times. I was just too scared, and I couldn't bring myself to it. But I also had no idea what I was going to do. I was not ready to be a mom. No one thought I would ever be a mom. And I had my baby, and I wasn't a terrible mom. But I remember my 21st birthday, he was sick, and I couldn't go out. So I got 2 tall boys and drank them in my closet. And I have many memories. And then when I finally did get to go out for my 21st birthday, because I knew that I wouldn't survive 21 shots, I decided that I was going to try and kiss 21 guys, and I made it to 19. And my mom thought that I was going to be home that night, which is still in my mind ridiculous because I was out to celebrate my 21st birthday. And I ended the night vomiting all over my car. I did not drive. My friends drove my car. I ended up vomiting all over the side of it. Woke up the next morning, my mom blowing up my phone, and I ran barefoot 13 blocks back to my car. Because I ended up somewhere else, because that's usually how it happens, right? And I had huge blisters all over the bottom of my feet. And my mom she was so angry, because I think a little part of her was realizing that I was becoming what she didn't want me to become, what I had learned to become. That same year, I got my second OWI, which in the state of Michigan was not great. I was 21. I had a baby. I had breathalyzers twice a day. And I would go sometimes at 6:00 in the evening just so that I could go and drink afterwards. And I would measure out my booze in measuring cups, ounce for ounce, so that I would know how much exactly I consumed, so that I would know how many hours I needed to metabolize all of it so that I could blow the next morning and not have any issues. And I mean, I was 21, 22 when this was happening. And when I went out, I mean, I would come home, there would be a babysitter, and I would just be shit-faced. In no way, shape, or form capable of taking care of myself, let alone a child. I mean, there was a night when I came home, and my kid was in the house, and I woke up in all of the clothes that I was wearing the night before, passed out on the couch. I had lost my keys, which they were actually just in the hallway. Didn't know where my car was, had no idea how I had made it home. I remember another night when I was sick, and it was Halloween. It was my last Halloween that I drank. And my mom and I had gotten this huge fight because she didn't want me to go out because I was sick. And I was just like, I'm young, I'm going to go party and have fun. Well, I drank a pint that night, blacked out, ended up making out with the host's boyfriend, tripped and cut my hand open on an engine piece. I came to at that time to a kitten feeding me shots and a guy who said he used to be in the army super gluing my hand together. Then I blacked out again. And then my mom had kept calling, and I ripped my phone in two and threw it against a tree. And the way that I got home was graciously, instead of kicking my ass like she should have, the girl, the host of the party, she had her boyfriend drive her car, and she drove me home in my car. And yeah, I couldn't even make it in the house. I was in the yard just shit-faced, and my mom came out screaming at me and saying all sorts of horrible things. And that wasn't a sign either. It wasn't until I had 2 holiday parties that year, and I went to a bar that doesn't measure other shots, and I blew hot on the first of the year after New Year's. I remember feeling so lonely, and we went to the gay bar, and I just didn't care that I had to blow the next morning. I was like, I'm gonna get gay man to kiss me, and I'm just gonna get shitty, and that's how it's gonna happen. And yeah, woke up the next morning, blew hot. On the 2nd, January 2nd, 2011, we had an employee party and proceeded to just get hammered. I actually have a scar on my chest because that night I was so drunk that I dropped a cigarette down my shirt and didn't realize it until I had practically burned a hole in my chest. So I blew hot on the 3rd as well. And at that point, I knew I was in trouble, right? Like, I was going to get arrested. I blew hot, and both days just pee straight out so that the cops didn't get called and I didn't get picked up. And it was the of January, the day before, and a cop knocked on my door at 8 o'clock, and I was actually up all night with some boy. And we tried to hide from the cops because that always works. And finally, you know, I let him in. I got cuffed up. And this cop was a little different than most cops. And he cuffed me in front. He treated me with respect. He didn't treat me like some shitty, drunk mom. He had just had twin babies. And we spent the entire ride to the jail talking about our kids. And I got to hear someone talk about having a family and raising their children in a way that I had never really heard or experienced. It didn't really sell me. But then I got in front of the judge and I basically pleaded with him. I was like, my son's 2nd birthday is tomorrow. He's with his dad. I need to go pick him up. And the judge looked me dead in the eye and said, all right, well, here's the deal, miss. You go celebrate that birthday with your boy. If I ever see you in here again, Child Protective Services will be called. Still wasn't necessarily sold at this point, but it did make me think. And I remember the night of my 2nd OWI, which is a few months prior to this, I was fine during the entire arrest until I started sobering up, and they almost sent me to the hospital because I was inconsolable. I was like, I'm going to lose my kid. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose everything. And I did end up losing my job because I got arrested for a probation violation and didn't show up for work because that's how life happens when you make bad choices. So yeah, that judge made me think that I had to do something and at the time I didn't realize that it was that big, right? It was, stay sober and not get arrested, not stay sober and change your life and the trajectory of your son's life and the trajectory of your entire family. That wasn't a thought. That wasn't anything at that time. But it became.
But you said you weren't sold yet. So where was the point where you were sold?
It took a while. At that point, I had gotten pretty okay at not drinking when my kiddo was around. I had my own apartment. Things were great. It was when he would go to his dad's every other weekend. And I was in Traverse City. His dad was in Grand Rapids. We would meet halfway and we would meet, and I would drop off my son, stop at the bar, grab a drink, go home, go to work, get out of work, party all night, wake up the next morning. And so I knew that if I wasn't going to get arrested again, something had to change and I had to figure something out. So within probation, I had to go to AA. And, I didn't trust myself for a really long time. So my son stepped out of the door. I lived in AA. I am a professional euchre player as a result of that. And it probably wasn't until I was a year and a half in, fake it until you make it, right? That I had this recognition of, oh, whoa, this is weird. This is different. Why isn't this chaos? And it still was, because for a while in my sobriety, chaos felt better. So I would find chaos in other places. But I would still sit in meetings thinking, well, am I going to drink when I'm off probation? Am I going to drink when I'm off probation? Most people drink when they're off probation. I mean, I'm 22. Why would I stop drinking? I'm a baby still. Like, I have so much life and so much drinking ahead of me. I moved to Grand Rapids shortly after my 1 year sober. And in AA, they say, changing your location changes nothing about you. For me, I needed the distance from my family. I needed to get away from my enabling patterns with my brother, my enabling patterns with my mother, and just all the drama and dysfunction, right? Because I was sober and no one else was still. And I needed my space. So I relocated to Grand Rapids and became really, really close with my son's dad's family. And they kind of took me in and took me under their wing and slowly but surely showed me how life can be, that there is something different, that not every household is filled with dysfunction. It was very scary. I didn't know what I was doing, but I created incredible friendships through the program. I was lucky enough to have 3 incredible women that I had grown up with that didn't give up on me through anything. One of which I got to carry my baby boy with. We both had baby boys. We are 6 weeks apart, and our boys are 5 weeks apart. And through that support, I was able to maintain sobriety. I was able to continue to learn. I was able to continue to figure out who the hell I was outside of my trauma.
So would you say that being forced to go AA was AA pivotal in realizing you had a problem?
Absolutely. I guarantee if I hadn't gotten in trouble and if I hadn't found those rooms, I would have made it to 23. I would have been a dead hooker in a trunk somewhere. And I wholeheartedly believe that. Those rooms changed my life. While that being said, there's also a lot of problems in the rooms, I'm still very involved with my friends from AA, but I had to leave some of the rooms for a long time. I was sexually assaulted in a room. Someone had relapsed and came into a meeting and decided it was a good time to grope me. And I punched him in the stomach in the room. And that really changed how I felt about the program. Now that I'm older, I realize it's very much principles over personalities. But I think that it was very important for me to step out away from those rooms as well, because it gave me an opportunity to see who I was on my own, and never on my own, because I've always had such an incredible, and that's the number one part. Well, one of the number one parts of me maintaining my sobriety is having just the most incredible support system, both that I have met from AA and out in the world.
How would you describe yourself when you were in active addiction?
It's a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I was a professional drunk driver. I was so promiscuous. I had had so much hurt, and I didn't realize it, right? Like I didn't even know that I had been sexually assaulted by my youth pastor until I was in, therapy at 24. And I told the story and my therapist was like, no, that's not okay. That's not how it's supposed to be. And there were so many things that were so normalized for me for so many years that I had no idea.
How would you say it affected your relationships with your family and friends?
I hurt so many people. I hurt so many people. No one could trust me. I certainly didn't trust myself, and no one else should have. I was flaky. I was actively, publicly trying to take other men from their girlfriends. I was, like I said, a professional drunk driver. And everybody had so many high hopes for me, right? I was the golden child. I was the girl who graduated from honors and had a full ride and was so great. And then I became this person that, you could not stand in my way of getting drunk or of whatever I wanted while I was drunk. If I wanted to do something, it was going to happen. I remember blacking out one night, and I came back to while driving my car down railroad tracks because I thought it was a road. And I still can't see at night very well. But yeah, that was a thing. No one could trust me, and for good reason.
In what ways did you hurt those that you loved?
I took advantage of a lot of people to write my own narrative, to make it fit what was okay for me at the time, because I was 22. I was invincible. You couldn't hurt me. I could hurt me. I was basically just a big old piece of shit to everybody. People who loved me and cared for me, I couldn't give them the time of day. If anything stood in between me and what I wanted to do, then they were nothing to me. And I made sure that they knew that. Yeah. I mean, I was just a shady little girl.
You had said you woke up to a kitten giving you shots.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Oh, it's Halloween. I dressed as a blood that Halloween because I am a very conscious white girl. Goodness gracious. Yeah, kitten costume. Yeah.
Okay, it makes sense. Who are you today?
Oof. I'm my favorite me. I'm a musician. I'm an animal activist. I'm a mother to a pretty badass 13-year-old, which blows my mind. I am a person that people can trust. I think one of the turning points in my sobriety was about 3 years in, and I had a friend who we had been through a lot of stuff together, and he had started dating a girl, and he wanted me to check her out and brought her into my bar. And I was sober. I bartended sober for far too long, but that was a very good tool for me as well. And so I was their bartender at their first date. And when they got married, they asked me to officiate their wedding. And it was such an incredible honor that someone was like, she can go to a wedding, and not only go to a wedding, but officiate it without embarrassing herself or getting wasted. And that was a really incredible feeling for me. After that happened, I mean, so many incredible things opened up, and they did earlier than that. But I was still very damaged. Today, I'm a girl who takes life with a grain of salt. It's amazing what death can do to a person. I have an incredibly morbid sense of humor now. That has also helped keep me sober. But really, who I am today is a person that I never thought I'd be. I'm a friend. I'm Aunt Ra. I can be trusted with people's children, including my own. I haven't missed a single one of my son's field trips. I've been able to be a chaperone. I'm an educator. I am a human being who feels feelings full on sometimes, which is hard, but I am capable of waking up every day and living life on life's terms. I understand that it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a walk in the park. But with every day that passes, that I stay sober, I continue to be a better person. And sometimes I wake up and I am in disbelief of who I am, because I never thought that I would get to a place where I could say, hi, I'm Sara. I haven't drank in 11 years. My parents both died. And I stayed sober. What? That's absolutely, like, I had to have the sex talk with my 13-year-old boy. Well, actually it was 10 at the time, because that's when you should be talking to children about that stuff. And I didn't have to drink afterwards because it was too stressful.
Speaking of your kid, what values and lessons are you teaching him now that you're sober, so he isn't as likely to follow down that same path?
So like I said, I got sober 8 days before he turned 2. So that is something that I can say I'm very lucky for as an addict, that my child was affected, but doesn't have many memories. And with it's very much, I want him to know what he's up against. It's never been a secret that I am sober. It's very important to me that he knows that that is the life that I live. And I mean, he gets to see it. He sees it in the relationships that I have with people. One of the most important things I would say is I teach him how to be an honest, caring human being. I teach him that it's okay to feel things, and that life is hard, and that it sucks. But with some good coping mechanisms, good relationships with people, a community to stand behind you, and returning, giving what you get. It's so important. He is one of the funniest human beings I've ever met. And it's a testament to what we've been through together. It hasn't been easy for him by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, yeah, I got sober at 2, but that doesn't mean, or when he was 2, but that doesn't mean that everything was peaches and cream immediately. Getting sober young, there was FOMO, fear of missing out, because all of my peers were still out partying and drinking, and it was okay for them. And if there's one thing that I try to instill in him, it's be confident in who you are and what your decisions are. If I had let that self-doubt, I would have relapsed a million times. I do it for me and for how incredible my life is these days. I mean, I've gotten to sing at Carnegie Hall. I've sang Mass at Notre Dame. I've gotten to sing all over the world. I've been a featured soloist. I have gotten to teach voice. I have gotten to do so many incredible things that I wouldn't have been able to do. And each day, we focus on how can we do a little bit better? What's that 1%? Life is still hard. I mean, I went back to school and I had gotten to a point where school was paying my bills, scholarships and everything. And then all of a sudden, my parents died very unexpectedly. And I mean, my life completely changed. I went from, just a month before taking 13 credits, 16 credits, singing 20 hours a week to finding out my mom was dead and that my dad was dying. And then my dad died. And I didn't have all of the music and all of the school, and I retired from the service industry last May. And it's been a major, major struggle, right? But from years and years and years of making mistakes, I have a toolbox now filled with wonderful things that I can do. People that I can call, techniques, journaling, therapy, all sorts of amazing things. And that toolbox combined is what keeps me sober. And as I continue to do these things, I add more things to my toolbox. And I don't know, but I think that a girl with tools is pretty sweet. So it's something I aspire to do. We never stop learning. And that is number one.
What do you personally believe makes for a successful sobriety? You mentioned therapy, so. Yeah,
so there's a lot. There's a lot of things. I think sobriety is very different for a lot of people. I mean, even if you just look at my family and, my mom, my aunt, my brother, and I, we all got sober differently. All of us got sober differently. You'll find a lot of people who are, dry drunks or dry addicts. And those are the people who don't drink, but aren't doing things to make themselves a better person, to assimilate better into what they want to do for their life. My absolute favorite saying from AA is progress, not perfection. And I don't think, I had years of sobriety. But I don't think that really hit home until I started therapy. One-on-one therapy has been instrumental. There's just something about having someone in your life that has no stock in the decisions or, what happens to you, to give you an outside perspective and to pull things from you and to challenge you and to make you think about things in a way that you haven't thought about them. And I mean, just my dad died and I just lived in his clothes. So my therapist was like, Sara, stop wearing your dead dad's clothes. Every once in a while, it's cool, but you're not going to be able to move on. And then just 2 weeks ago, she was like, Sara, go get baby Snuggles. This is your homework for this week. Go get baby Snuggles. I'm a new aunt. And get the fuck out of the house. And if it wasn't for her, this woman who has no stock in my life other than the fact that she knows more about me than most people, if it wasn't for her being like, okay, get off your ass. Yeah, your parents are dead. Do something. Get out in the world. You've spent 4 weeks in your bed crying and feeling sorry for yourself. Go. And just for saying that, I did my nails. I went out to a hockey game. I spent an entire weekend with my niece and got all the Snuggles. I went back to the college, signed up for classes for next semester. I got to go sing with my choir. I started taking voice again because I'll be singing at my mom's memorial in May. My son and I have had so much fun in the last couple of weeks. And it's also nice to have someone in your life to tell you that it's going to be okay. Because sometimes when you're in that much turmoil and that much trauma, it doesn't feel like it. But and it's not just therapy. I have some incredible human beings in my corner. It takes a village to raise a child. And my son has the rest of his grandparents that are living are wonderful. I didn't have a relationship with any of my grandparents. So the fact that my son is able to have a relationship with 5 of them is absolutely beautiful to me. And also, everything happens so much for a reason. And I think that getting that mindset, and a lot of people will be like, bah. But for me, getting that mindset, I mean, how thankful am I that I got pregnant at 19 accidentally and was able to give my mom 13 years with her grandchild. And they were best friends. I mean, my son was the last person to talk to her the night that she passed. And there isn't just one thing in sobriety. It takes, like I said, that little toolbox that you got. There's so much. And life is not easy. And it doesn't just get magically easier because I don't drink, but it does get easier when I'm not waking up in jail, when I'm not waking up next to people that I don't know, when I'm not leaving my kid to go get shit-faced and make out with some dude that has a girlfriend. But I'd say for me, number 1, it would be therapy. Number 2, it would be a support system. Number 3, it would be a recognition that there is something bigger. People refer to it as their higher power, God. I grew up in the church. I'm a pretty spiritual person, but I have very vivid beliefs that go along. I mean, people will be like, blah, but, my God isn't a shameful God, because if my God was a shameful God, then I would be dead in a gutter. Because if any addict or alcoholic knows, we are the best at feeling shame and feeling sorry for ourselves. And without that huge toolbox of people, coping mechanisms, therapy, I mean, I can't even imagine where it would be. And for me, it's about believing in myself, but it's also really nice to have other people around me that believe in me too.
I think this is the difference between sobriety and recovery. you can be sober, but if you still have a lot of work left to do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, oh my gosh, 11 years sober. You must like, I learn something new every day about myself, about my sobriety, about the world, about life, about love, about relationships, parenting, being a human being. And I think that that's probably one of the most beautiful things about sobriety is that I'm able to experience all of those things and feel all of those things and move through all of those things and get a better understanding of who I am every single day. And I don't ever want that to stop. I don't ever want that to stop. I want to continue making changes so that my son's life is vastly different than mine. And it already is. It's absolutely insane to me when I sit down and think about how different his childhood was from my childhood and how much more informed his childhood is. And he definitely doesn't know. God, someday he'll watch this video and be like, oh goodness. But, there's an age appropriate amount of things that you can tell a child. I want him to know what he's up against. He knows what's going on, but not, he doesn't need to know the details. But I want him to be informed so that when he is of age or, he's a teen, he's going to start experimenting. Oh, but I want him to know that I want him to be grounded in who he is. And that has started with me. I mean, when I first got sober, you couldn't have paid me money to walk out of the house without makeup on. You could not have. And wearing makeup has nothing to do with my sobriety, right? But I'm so much more comfortable in myself now that this is probably the first time I've put makeup on in weeks. And that's my day-to-day life. Well, plus my son says he doesn't want a stepdad, so he doesn't want me to wear makeup anymore. But yeah.
Is there anything else that you feel helped you maintain your sobriety?
A willingness. It took me a long time to be willing to see that life could be different, to be willing to see that I could be different, to be willing to see that it wasn't always going to be like that life could be different. I could be the first homeowner in our family. Not yet, because the market is insane, but we're working on it. The willingness to change and to want to change and want to be a better person was huge for me. Am I perfect? Not even close. But like I said, my favorite is progress, not perfection. And sometimes it's one step forward, 4 steps back. That's how this year has felt for me, losing my parents and all of a sudden I am the grown-up for real now, and having to make all of these life or death decisions.
What does sobriety mean to you today?
Sobriety means everything to me today. It's not who I am. It's just a piece of who I am because I am many, many things. But sober is probably my favorite. It gives me so much hope for the future. So much hope for future generations. So much hope for my son and to see a child grow up with a little less dysfunction than what I had. A lot less. It's hard to give myself credit sometimes. But without sobriety, I wouldn't have the opportunity to be a musician. I wouldn't have the opportunity to have the deep meaningful, beautiful relationships that I have with my best friends. I have some of the most incredible women in my life that I support and that they support me. I mean, within 2 days, my friends were in from all over the country, and I had to leave and go down to the hospital in Detroit with my dad. And those girls stayed at my mom's apartment and organized and boxed everything up because they knew that what was about to happen was going to be insane. And obviously we had hoped that my dad was going to survive. But I mean, they cleaned out the fridge. I have people in my life that think about whether or not I'm going to be back in the house for 2 weeks and whether or not the food is going to stink. And that's, I have people that can fill in the gaps. And I'm able to fill in the gaps for other people now. When people are grieving, when they are experiencing life, I'm able to help them. I never thought I'd see a life where I want to help the way that I do now. I never thought that I would be a human being that was available to people who needed help. And I can very proudly say that I've created a life within my sobriety that is beautiful. And I'm so happy that I got arrested so many times. Because without those things and without all those experiences, I wouldn't have been able to see my potential and be who I am.
So what advice would you give to others that are struggling?
Number one is honesty. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with everybody else. If you want to work, there's a level of honesty that is gut-wrenching and terrifying, but it has to be found. For me, I would say my recovery really truly started when I started one-on-one therapy. I think that is, anyone in the program or out of the program should tell you, so much of addiction has to do with covering trauma. And a lot of it is trauma that we don't even remember or experience. We do experience it, but we don't remember it. We don't recognize that it is trauma. So much of my trauma, I didn't even realize was trauma until I had someone professional be like, hey, that's not what normal people experience. That's not what normal people do. Therapy has been just absolutely instrumental for me. And with the trust comes finding people that you trust. A community is so important.
I think that's a struggle for a lot of people. They will lose a lot of their friends when they start to pursue their path of recovery.
Those are good friendships lost, though.
There's that period where you feel alone, though. Especially when you're dealing with something so heavy.
It's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Did you lose a lot of your friends?
Oh, most all of them. Most everybody. And I was able to gain a lot of them back with, making amends and changing my life and showing them that I was someone different, no matter how many words, but there are still friends that were good for me, that I hurt, that didn't forgive me. And that's okay. I accept that because I hurt people, right? I accept that. But then there's so many people that were so unhealthy, the person buying me the next shot, the person encouraging me, the person who's like, oh, Sarah is driving, let's go. Those people are gone. And it's a much more beautiful life without those. It's very isolating. And that's why it's so important to find other people who are in recovery. It's so important to have someone that you can talk to honestly, like a therapist. And it's so important to attempt to build a community, because it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise a human, an adult.
If you don't mind me asking, what kind of therapy do you do? Do you do like CBT?
Yes,
CBT?
I currently do cognitive behavioral therapy. And for me, it's very much progress, not perfection. It has taken a long time. I've had a lot of trauma, and I think the biggest thing that my therapist has helped me realize is that we're all our own biggest critic. But it is so nice to have someone in my ear saying, be nicer to yourself. Give yourself a break. You're doing awesome. It's okay. And eventually, you start believing it. And then you start making actions and decisions that align with the fact that you're an okay person. Do the best you can.
Do you have any other advice?
You can do it. It's hard, but it gets easier, and then it gets beautiful. My second favorite AA saying is, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but those miracles will always appear if you work for them. And that is a testament to my recovery and my sobriety in my life. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. I should not be alive today. And if I was alive today, I should be in prison. So the fact that I'm sitting here with 11 years sober and a 13-year-old boy who loves me and can talk to me about everything, including weird teenage boy stuff. It's a pretty incredible life. But you got to work at it. It's not just going to happen. You have to recognize your character flaws. You have to recognize you might be the bad guy in your story. And that's a hard thing to accept. But once you do, you can start trying to become the good guy. Redemption storylines are always the best.
Well, I'm very proud of you.
Thanks, bud.
I think that's going to wrap it up for this interview.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And sharing your story.